Hey, we're on a hikoi. We're walking with Jesus all the way to the cross at Easter. And so far, we've been with Jesus as he made his triumphant entry into Jerusalem, where the Jews were lining the streets and shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna," because Jesus was entering Jerusalem. We've sat with Jesus at the Last Supper, where he spent time with his disciples, and he broke bread and drank wine and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. This wine is my blood, which will be poured out for you." And we've sat with him as he had a conversation with Judas, and Judas went off and betrayed Jesus to the religious leaders for 30 pieces of silver. We were with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was praying, "Father, if it's your will, please take this from me." And he was arrested. And now, today, we're going to go with Jesus to the first sham of a trial. There are 5 trials that Jesus faced on the way to the cross. We're going to talk about 2 of those today briefly. But remember, as when Jesus entered Jerusalem and the Jews who were shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna," when they were shouting that, these were most likely the Jews who'd made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the 2-day Passover festival that was about to begin. Because these Jews that made that journey to Jerusalem, they knew Jesus. They'd seen him in the hills and in the country. They'd heard him preach. They'd seen the miracles. And so they're shouting Hosanna because their king has come home. And then there are the Jews that were living in Jerusalem, and they go, "Who is this guy?" And we see the tension in the story to the cross just starting to grind a little bit. There's a strange reality of the human condition that says that we will hear what we want to hear, we will see what we want to see, resulting in the truth being defined by our own perceptions. Let me read that to you again. The reality of the human condition is that we will hear what we want to hear, see what we want to see, resulting in the truth being defined by our own perceptions. I want to talk to you about the ambush. My ambush. I don't know if I may have shared this before, I don't know, but I'm going to share it again. So the ambush. So in my previous role as the national leader of Baptist Youth Ministries in New Zealand, thank you, Shannon. Every 2 years we'd pull the youth pastors and youth leaders together for a national youth hui at the Papamoa Christian Beach Camp. Could you think of a better location? Nothing like taking youth leaders to the beach. Always going to be a good time. On this particular year, Shannon was cooking, using his skills as a mighty chef. And on one particular night, he made hamburgers. So good with those hamburgers, everybody couldn't get enough of them. If you could get 2 each, it would have been good. If we could have got 3, it would have been better. Hamburgers and chips. It was a great night. One youth leader came to me and said, "I need to meet with you." Yep, that's good. I can do that. When I went to the meeting, and I thought it was going to be a one-on-one, face-to-face, it became a 5-on-1. And so I got a support person fearing what might be happening. So I got a support person to come with me. And we sat in this meeting, and it took an hour. And these 5 men and women of God, youth leaders, frothed, swore, demanded, accused, everything on me. It was all about me. And I just sat silently the whole time, not wanting to even answer their accusations. At best, I don't even know how you'd call them men and women of God the way they were acting, because this is not how the children of God should act in any way, shape, or form. And I want to tell you this because this is what was going on when Jesus came to Caiaphas for a sham trial, it was the same. I want to read to you from Matthew chapter 26, and I want you to listen really carefully to the story and see what the Spirit of God might reveal to you as we read out of this. And I'll refer back to my story later, but this is Jesus' story, which is way more important. Then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the religious law and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they could not use anyone's testimony. Finally, 2 men came forward who declared, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" But Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus replied, "You have said it. And in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, "Blasphemy! Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict?" "Guilty," they shouted. "He deserves to die." Then they began to spit on Jesus, his face, and beat him with their fists. And some slapped him, jeering, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?" A sham of a trial. It was predicted that this would happen years ago, years before, hundreds and hundreds of years before. In Isaiah 53, verse 5 and 8, it said, "He was pierced for our sins, crushed for our iniquity. He bore the punishment that makes us whole. By his wounds we are healed. We'd all gone astray like sheep, or following our own way, but the Lord laid upon him the guilt of us all. Though harshly treated, he submitted and did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, or a sheep silent before shearers, he did not open his mouth. Seized and condemned, he was taken away. Who would have thought any more of his destiny? For he was cut off from the land of the living, struck for the sins of the people." The only way for Satan to win any battle is with deception. And so we arrive at the climax of the story where Satan's deception is reaching new heights. It's a sham trial. When Jesus is arrested at the Garden of Gethsemane, he's taken to Annas' house. Annas was the high priest. He was a great high priest, had a superbly big following. He was so popular that the Romans decided to fire him from his job. First mistake. In the Old Testament, when you're a high priest for life. But the Romans fire him. And so Jesus is taken from Annas' house to Caiaphas' house. Caiaphas is the son-in-law of Annas. Annas had 5 sons. Every one of them became a high priest. Within 3 years, they were all fired from their jobs. But the son-in-law, Caiaphas, is now the high priest. Might tell you a little bit about his character. I think he was easily bent over by the Romans to do what they wanted him to do. And so Jesus is taken to the house of Caiaphas and put on trial. It's midnight. It's another mistake. In the Old Testament, you cannot have a trial in nighttime. It must be through the day. And so Jesus should have been put aside and they should have waited till the morning. But no, they're having a trial at night. It's against the law. And so Jesus is put on trial. It also says in the Old Testament that you must have 2 to 3 witnesses to bring an accusation like this to a trial. They have no witnesses. And they're trying to stir up witnesses to get false testimony about Jesus, but they can get none. But then 2 men come forward and testify. Most likely paid off by the leaders of the day. Told that they could, if they say this, they will be paid off handsomely. Because if you brought a false accusation in those days, and it was false, then you would receive the treatment that, or the punishment that the person you were bringing the false accusation against was going to get. And so they've been paid off the coming of a false accusation against Jesus at a nighttime trial. And the other thing that's wrong here is Caiaphas tore his robes. For a high priest to tear his robes, they would have been put to death. You don't do that as a high priest. Everything about this trial is wrong. It's a sham. Satan's deception is reaching new heights. Jesus predicted it would happen. Matthew chapter 26, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming. The Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the place of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. He predicted it would happen, and it happened. The truth is being revealed. Isn't this what we hope for in our own lives, that the truth would be revealed? Have you ever been in a situation where you've said something, but the person has only heard what they want to hear? Or you've done something, an action, but the person watching has only seen what they want to see. And so they bring false accusation against you. And all you hope is that the truth will come out and be revealed. That was my situation in the ambush. I longed for the truth to come out. I find it interesting that Peter, in this story, is following it at a distance. As far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sits down with the guards to see the end. Now, the word end in the Bible is the word telos, which means to see the outcome, to see the end of the story, what's going to happen. I think Peter was struggling to understand that this isn't the end, but actually this is just the beginning. The beginning of the purpose that God has for you and for me and for humankind. But Peter couldn't stay away from Jesus. Perhaps the sharp rebuke from Jesus when Peter cut off the ear of Malchus, or the scolding to stay awake, to pray, both weighed on Peter at this moment, maybe. After all, he pledged his loyalty to Jesus even unto death, didn't he? The truth of Peter's loyalty will be tested, though, and shown to be wanting, lacking under his own efforts due to the pre-trial sham of that night. I don't think that the pattern of deception ever changes with the enemy. You know, these 2 men in Matthew 26:61, they come forward, they say, "This man said," and this is what he said, these men said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. So when it comes to deception, haven't you always noticed that there's a hint of truth in false accusations? Just enough to make you doubt yourself. Just enough to make you think, oh, well, maybe it's true. That was so true in the COVID years. Man. A hint of truth. Just enough to make you think or doubt yourself. Often one word can make the difference. One word. The difference between an honest statement and a dishonest one. Something like this. A woman without her man is nothing. Or a woman without her man is nothing. Ladies, you love that, don't you? Isn't that a true statement, gentlemen? If Jesus threatened to destroy the sacred temple in 3 days, he would have been committing blasphemy. This is what they wanted, which deserves death penalty. He would have been outed as a fraud. But is that what Jesus really said? Was it a lie or was it a deception? Jesus did indeed say that the temple would be destroyed and that it would rise again in 3 days. He said that. But I wonder what you heard. It's not Jesus who's going to destroy the temple. It's the wicked men who are judging him right now. John's gospel gives us the detail of the statement that Jesus made. It says in John chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, so the Jews said to Jesus, what sign do you show us for doing these things? And Jesus answered them, and Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up. Jesus is talking about his death, his resurrection. Jesus is saying that he is the temple that will be destroyed. The temple is the place where the presence of God dwelt in the Old Testament. In Jesus, we have the ultimate temple. The presence of God dwelled fully in Christ. He would be destroyed, but Jesus isn't going to be destroyed and left to lie in the rubble and destruction. No. In 3 days, that temple will be raised back to life, to greater glory and beauty and power, more than it ever had before. So at the midnight trial, sham trial in Caiaphas' house, the only witnesses they could find claimed that Jesus was going to destroy the temple that took 48 years to build. The strange reality of the human condition is that we hear what we want to hear. We see what we want to see, resulting in truth being defined by our own perceptions. You know, they couldn't execute him under Roman occupation, but they could recommend to the Romans authorities that Jesus face crucifixion. They had a predetermined plan, and they were going to bring it to their self-determined end. And when the high priest confronted Jesus, Jesus remained silent. Jesus was in control of the sham trial and the predetermined outcome of the crucifixion and the resurrection. Wouldn't it be great if in the face of trial and accusation we had the strength like Jesus to be silent? One way to defeat the enemy is not to play the enemy's game. Don't step into that space that the enemy wants you to step into. Jesus remained silent in verse 63, and in verse 64 he said, you have said so. Silence was the best outcome. I always find it interesting too that at the first trial at Annas' house, Jesus said to everyone, I've spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in the synagogues. I've taught in the temple, where all the Jews come together, and I spoke nothing in secret. truth of who Jesus was and the truth of what Jesus did was open for all to see and for all to hear. He needed not to answer any false accusation or distorted charges against him. When evil intimidates with a question, the intent is to twist your words. Evil thinks it's in control, but Jesus is in control. The Son of God who crushes the power of evil is in control. You know, if you take the time to sit in this space and reflect on the story and these midnight trials that should never have happened, we can see that when Jesus, taking on the chains and restraints, Jesus breaks us from the tyranny of Satan, who's seeking to manipulate us and seeks to trap us in sin and evil. We must come, friends, to a place of thankfulness for what Jesus suffered that night. One either mocks Jesus for his weakness or perceived weakness with Annas and Caiaphas, or one looks through the lens of awe and his majestic power through silence before wicked men. It's the kind of strength, again, that I say I wish I always had. The only recourse that wicked people have against Jesus, and the only course that wicked people have against you, is violence and rage. When evil realizes that it's losing, it strikes out with its only tool, anger and intimidation. Matthew 26, 67 to 68. And they spit on his face and they struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" In the first trial before Annas, it was no different. When Jesus had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Jesus suffered shame and false accusation because he loves us. You know, that night, God's grace was proven right. He did not spare his body or his reputation for nothing. Jesus willingly submitted to wear chains so that our souls might be freed from the chains of eternal death and damnation. The two midnight trials before the religious leaders in Jerusalem come to an ultimate question. Is Jesus the Messiah that he declared himself to be? Was Israel right in calling Jesus out as a false Messiah? Well, the false accusations from the Sanhedrin and the chief priests struggled to find credible support for their charges against Jesus. They didn't have it. The evidence shows that testimony against Jesus was a result of fallen human condition. They broke every law that there was to put him to trial. They were the result of a fallen human condition, where we hear what we want to hear and we see what we want to see. That's why Elvis is still alive somewhere in this world today. If you believe that, then you believe what you want to hear. This is why two witnesses at Jesus' trial were dug up to testify to Jesus' claims of divine authority. Jesus emptied himself of all royal privilege, willingly to endure the shame and torture of that last night. Friends, the false trials showed the unmeasurable goodness of God and the nature of God's grace for each and every one of us. Let's pray together.